In this video, I'm gonna take a closer look at the Relab LX480 to answer the question, is it worth the price? And if you're new to this channel, I'm all about budget solutions. I love free plugins. I think they can operate just as good as most of the paid ones. When I pay 300 or 400 euros for basically a reverb plugin, I want to make sure that it gives me something that my stock plugins in Logic can't do. I've split this video up in two parts. First, we're gonna take a look at some acoustic drums that need some gluing. And by gluing, I'm talking about shorter programs like small rooms, small chambers, short plates to glue the entire kit together. And the second part is gonna be dry 808 kicks, snares, toms, and even a cowbell. And I'm gonna try to mimic the sound that they made in the 80s using the LX480 based on the famous Lexicon 480 reverb unit. And if you haven't actually seen a real live 480 unit, you've most certainly heard it. And I'm sure if you stick around, you'll get to hear some of the classic Lexicon reverb sounds. Let's jump into Logic and look at some acoustic drums.
Welcome to the experimentarium. We will start with the acoustic drums. And as you know, Klaus will always be a part German when he goes into the more scientific part of the process of eliminating wrongly designed reverb units.
So what we have here is basically just a drum kit. I have three reverb sends set up. I've called them 480A, 480B, and 480C. I have some drums going into a subgroup. It's called drums clean. That subgroup is being compressed in parallel with an 1176 doing this. So we're gonna start off by highlighting what it is exactly that these three instances of 480, what it is they do. So this is the drums with reverb. I hope you can hear what I'm hearing, that this glue effect, it's not just reverb. And keep in mind that I'm just sending the snare bottom and snare top and a bit of the overheads and the overheads are only going to the first reverb. So what I thought I'd do, I'd start by going through the reverb presets on the first. This is the Music Club. Listen as I fade it in. And because we're in Logic, I can actually solo the aux with the reverb, and this is what the reverb sounds like. Good, immediate mid, but not a lot of top end, not a lot of bottom end. This is the second reverb. This is a thin plate. So the first was the Music Club. This is the thin plate. I'm gonna fade it in and overdo it. This is the reverb by itself. So the first verb was lots of punchy mid, no top end, no bottom end. The second one is a thin plate, and you can hear it as the name implies, it's a thin plate. So lots of that crispy top end that we love from Lexicon reverbs. And together, those two sound like this, just the reverbs. I hope you can hear that they complement each other. So this is the last reverb. It's a non-lin program, and this is what it sounds like. This is what it sounds like faded in with the kit. And this is what it sounds like on its own. Again, lots of punchy mid, but the time domain factor of these reverbs is a little bit different. So when I listen to all three reverbs alone, and remember, This is just my test. I love just pushing snare top, snare bottom, and sometimes a bit of the overheads or the room into the reverb. It's generally harder to change the sound of a snare in a given kit because it will be present in the top mic, the bottom mic, the overheads and the rooms, and sometimes if you leave them open, some of the tom and the hat. This is what the entire kit sounds like, and remember, this is what the 3 reverbs are adding. With the kit, without. Now, if you have trouble focusing on what these units are actually doing, listen to the snare in the context of the entire kit. When you see an idiot on the internet going like this, it means snare reverb. And of course, I can hear you all going, Klaus, you overdid it, there's way too much reverb. Yes, in the context of just a drum kit, but I promise you, in a full mix, this isn't too much. Well, perhaps it is actually. Now, the important thing to note in this case is that I've chosen 3 completely random or perhaps not so random presets. I've chosen one that has a lot of punchy mid. I then added the thin plate to give more of like an upward going reverb, and then finally I did the non-lin thing. A non-lin reverb is so dense that you most often you push the pre-delay just a tad. You can see in this case, on this Snare Non-Lin Classic preset, the pre-delay is set to 27 milliseconds. This ensures that even though the Music Club preset and the Non-Lin preset sound similar, you can actually hear that there's a small, ever so slight time difference between the first verb, the Music Club, which is more like, you know, actually playing in a music club, and then the non-lin that has this, it's a really short bloom, but with a pre-delay. I'm gonna try to push the pre-delay just a tad to exaggerate the effect. And if we listen to the 2 snares and I try to push the delay, I'm gonna shut off the 2 other reverbs and just push the pre-delay on the snare non-lin. You can get some really impressive results. And now I'm gonna try to see what I did. I pushed the pre-delay, I doubled it from 27 to 51. And this is the part of the video where I go 100% Bob Clear Mountain fanboy and try to underline the fact that Bob has pioneered the 480 pre-delay, or not exactly the 480, but I know he used to use the 480, Lexicon 480 in all its glory. But his use of pre-delay in reverbs is legendary, and if you listen to almost any song that he mixed in the 80s or in the 90s, there's a lot of use of the pre-delay. You can use it to make a drum kit bigger. Listen as I push the pre-delay, making the snare non-lin move back. No pre-delay. I love it. Is it worth it? Is it worth the price? I paid 180 euros for this plugin. This, to me, is everything I want from a reverb that's not included in Logic. Space Designer can't do this, not really. It can do similar things. The gluing effect, not to my ears. And the fact that the classic preset, they just work out of the box. And remember, every time you get to be lazy when you're doing music production, in cases like this, it just means that you get to go home to your wife and kids a little bit sooner. Let's take a look at the electric part of the video.
And there you have it. Yes, German Klaus is back, and we have to do the electronic part of the video using electronic drums. I've loaded up some 808 samples, and now we will listen in all its glory to what the LX480 has to offer. So halfway through the song, I will mute all of the synths, or mute the returns with the 480s version 4, and we will see what happens. Hopefully the entire song will collapse. With reverb.
Now, if that was a little bit too fast for you, I've muted all of the instruments, and I'm gonna do the same thing, but halfway through. Let's concentrate on the drums. Halfway through, I'm gonna mute all of the returns with the reverbs. Sounds like this. So what is it about this plugin that just make drums instantly sound 80s? Let's take a closer look. This is non-limb, and next is from Musicproducer. It is also great aliens, and next, this is basically those bass extension, and that's how the pick is. There's a clap with a long, sent to the long or the thin plate, and if we listen to that, without the reverb, quite a big difference. The gluing effect that I talked about, this is it. It's as if the reverb, it's not on top or below, it's around, encompassing the sound. Let's take a closer look at the snare. I'm sending the snare to the non-lin and the gated ambience because we're in an 80s kind of mood. So this is the snare with, let's do it without. This is without the reverb. And this is the two reverbs on its own. So the non-lin, we know. And actually I think the preset needs to, yes. And this is the gated ambience. Non-lin. Gated ambience. I'm gonna switch between them. So I hope you can hear that there is a difference, and as I tried to point out earlier, the non-lin also has a time-based thing going on with the pre-delay. The gated ambience pre-delay 0 milliseconds, and if we go to the non-lin, pre-delay of 27 milliseconds. So that's why you're hearing a difference in the time domain. Listen to the cowbell. Part of the 80s sound is being able to take electronically produced drums and putting them in a space that's not exactly believable perhaps, but that makes all of the different electronic sounds gel together. I talked to one of my heroes here in Denmark who told me that in the 80s, when they produced drums, it was not uncommon to use real cymbals, real hi-hats played by drummers. Sometimes they kept the toms, and then they programmed the kick and snare. Now, if you have recorded an entire kit without drum and snare with stereo miking, and you take a mono output from something like an 808, a Lindrum, but if you take a mono output with a sample and you need to blend that in. I've tried to show you why this could be a problem. I've taken a loop of an actual played hi-hat without my processing, which is just basically narrowing the stereo field. You can hear that it's off to the left. And I tried to narrow it a bit, but let's just keep it wide for the sake of trying to get the snare drum and kick to sit without reverb. This is without, so a naturally played hi-hat groove. Now to my ears, the dry version seems like it's not, it isn't glued together properly. On the hat loop, I actually tried to feeding it into the reverbs just to make it kind of gel even more. To me, that isn't too far off some of the 80s songs that I remember. The last thing I want to show you in this part of the video is that some of the presets in the original 480 was actually minded at not at all just reverbs, but things like, this preset, I have a send from the bass. Without the send, the actual bass sounds like this. With the send going to the bass keep close preset. And if we listen to just the preset, so it's kind of adding this harmonic. And if you want to be an asshole about it, you can put it on the kick, of course. So again, the original question was, is this worth the money? I paid 180 euros and I can say absolutely. I use mostly the shorter presets on drums like this. This is just for me to be happy. This had to be some kind of 80s song. But if you're a hip hop engineer, if you're just doing hip hop, trap, if you're just doing trashy pop that needs to have that 90s grit to it, this is an extraordinary unit to deliver some of that grit as some of that not so perfect reverb sound. But the thing about this is that the shorter programs are just extraordinarily well made, and they have the gluing effect that I can't get anywhere else. How can you survive without it? Of course you can. You can start by buying this, which is just a scaled down version. So to summarize, for me, and remember I got this on sale, I paid 180 euros, I believe. For me, I absolutely adore this reverb. It's not for me to say if it's 100% like the actual hardware. I've worked with the actual hardware, I loved it, and I believe that this plugin can do similar things. It's just this gluing effect. When you put on a reverb on a source, there's two parts. Is there reverb? Yes, there is reverb present, but does it put the source in a room, and if there are more than one microphone or sources in that room, does the reverb unit help glue the things together? And this unit does. When I put on the 480 small wood room, or like even the non-lin that you heard, or even the small wood room, I get this gluing effect, and it's so hard to get. I love the built-in Space Designer and Chromaverb in Logic for what they do. They give a sense of space. They give a sense of reverb on a source. But when it gets to actually gluing different signals together, like you heard on the acoustic drum kit, I think I haven't found a better plugin to replicate the Lexicon version of the gluing effect. So I know that brands like Bricasti have their Liquid Sonics 7th Heaven emulation that's also really, really nice at gluing things together. But I think for me, it's the big difference between just putting reverb on a source and making the glue feel like a part of the source. Anyway, for more reviews like this, hit the goddamn subscribe button. And if you're still here, have a really nice day.